When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite, looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Warning, creators of this game do understand the subject matter may be offensive to some, but they do honor the families and people that have been affected by these real-life tragedies that these individuals have caused. Want to play a game?
Oh, yeah!
Lover of true crime?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we got an interesting game for you to check out.
Wow.
With the mashup of influences such as horror movies, collecting cards, and RPGs.
What?
Led to giving birth to an incredible creation of this game, Killers, the card game.
You are all my children now.
This game is a collectible trading card game featuring some of the most infamous killers, with tidbits of trivia on the back of each card to help you learn some insight to each criminal.
Who the hell are you?
Let's not forget, during the game, cops will be chasing you and these criminals.
I'm a cop, you idiot!
However, check out their website listed through all social media today, which can be found under Killers, the card game.
Am I on the internet?
I want to play a game.
Hi, this is Terry Sullivan, big-time wrestling announcer from the 70s, and you are listening to Crazy Train Radio.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we are welcoming back for the third time part of this duo. He is a Detroit wrestling historian, photographer, got his initial run as a manager known as the Scholar, which you heard the last time. A lot smarter than the student, who was George Steele, and was also credited as the last manager of the Sheik. Dave Burzynski, aka Supermouth Dave Drason. Now let's not forget his partner in crime, who I'm finally glad to be able to talk to. He is an IBW Hall of Famer. He's been involved with the Detroit wrestling scene as well, Mr. Terry Sullivan. Gentlemen, welcome. Oh, and that guy who I will give him credit, Dr. Mike, who bought me lunch while I was in LA at Downtown Disney. He's also here.
Yeah,
I tease him, bro.
We had fun in Downtown Disney.
Yeah, we were people watching, that's for sure. But gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having us back.
Now, Terry
Of course.
Sullivan, though, is also a star of New England Sports Network, who's on at
Oh,
least, I think, twice on the All-Star Championship Wrestling Legends, the father and son duo that have a great product. What's that website, Terry, before I spaz out and forget?
You talking about the Jarrett Parsons thing?
Yeah.
Oh, wrestling classics.
Yeah,
Jeez.
classicallstarwrestling.com.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Google it and you'll go there. Lots of free, basically they bought the Pedro and Ronnie Martinez. I don't know how they got that, but they got that. Hopefully they didn't get ripped off on the money.
well, before we dive into the history, because this is the first time on this format we've had Terry, but as I came back into the room, Dave was here, and I was joking about being in LA and trying that burger and such. That was like $25. Good Lord. You had asked if I was out there for Mania, which I was not. However, we don't have to get fully into it. I do know Mike Lano was at Mania shooting. So before we get into the history, how was that for you?
I did the same thing in 2015, but because they put you and you have to bring your macro lenses. I don't have obviously the lenses that George Napolitano, some of those other folks have at the hard camera area. It's not that fun. The ropes are in the way, so I have more fun and enjoyed myself going into the press box with my pass. I could go in there, and that's where the legends are, and pose them together, like at the 2015 San Jose, Santa Clara one, where the 49ers had that new stadium. I posed the guys I felt were the most, if you can be close to ethical in pro wrestling, Bruno, Bret Hart, and Ricky Steamboat together for, one of my impossible group shots, which Dave Burzynski did that both in his own home base territory. And I've known these lads, obviously Dave a lot longer than Terry, but Terry's every bit the legend, Dave is. As a Sheik's announcer and so much more. But Dave put impossible guys together that you wouldn't post together. Like Blassie told us after that Outdoor Coliseum show, which was, pretty damn amazing. So I was kind of doing that and did that at WrestleCon and some of the other things. Like I had Tony Storm pose with some WWF folks and Lex Luger in the center. And then Tony Storm from AEW, that is. And then Enzo Amore, one, as he's calling himself now, who just gave notice and left MLW. He's on a handshake deal. It's throwing impossible poses together. The Acclaimed with, Mickey James and some other folks. The Acclaimed from AEW, Mickey James she's still Impact Women's World Champion. And a lot of cool stuff. Sue Green was there for you guys, both historian.
Yeah,
Green who never hit me as a Moolah girl. She came up in Moolah's system, then worked on the circuit with the Moolah girls like Tony Rose and Donna Christianello, etc., and then broke away and started traveling around the world. And few people know, like she was partnering with Hugo Savinovich's ex-wife, not Wendy Richter, but Rhonda Singh was married briefly to him. And, she was all over the place. So she was at this thing and it was fun. I was just dragging her up to any female legend. Like I took a picture of her with Dr. Britt Baker and finally met Britt Baker in the flesh. And Dave, I told her, hey, I had the thing as being pro wrestling's first legit dentist before you. She was very nice. I've been on her with Busted Open, but I was giving her shit for, and I said how proud I was. And the coolest thing is her robe. It's got all these, few people other than a dentist would know, oh, that's a curette, a dental curette on her robe, in this, glitter, mouth mirrors and stuff regular folks would know, like a toothbrush, but then explorers and curettes and an ultrasonic for removing plaque and tartar in root canal procedures equipment. So anyway,
Terry, do you remember when Susan Green came here with, I guess it was her girlfriend at the time, Paula Kay?
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Big Tex, man. She was great.
Yeah. Yeah. She really got over with the fans too, even though they were only here for like a month.
Yeah.
I remember them, working Kobo. Not so much she got a reaction there, but I remember in Toledo, her and Paula Kay had some great matches in Toledo.
Yeah, well, after Luke
Sheik,
Klein's group, what the heck?
yeah, I don't think Sheik really used Moolah girls. There was either, obviously, you guys know best, Luke Klein's trainees like a Heather Feather or Rachel Dubois. I think wasn't she a Luke Klein trainee?
No, I don't think
No.
so. Wildman's daughter. Probably
Whose
he.
daughter? Whose daughter again? I forget.
Wildman, Dave McKigney.
Oh yeah, the late great Wild Man. But he didn't, as a routine. I don't think he routinely used Willis girls when women came
No,
in.
unfortunately, no.
So
No, our best girls here were forever. It was almost like the Sheik and Bobo of girls was Lucille Dupre and Mary Jane Mull. But it would, every so often we'd get Marva Scott and Ethel Johnson, sisters, but they were tremendous black athletes. Then we had the Heather Feathers, we had the Linda Klein, and
Linda Klein, yeah.
Some of the more jabroni-ish gals like Kate Casey and
Penelope Hornhonker.
Yeah, Penelope Hornhonker, Patty Drake, and those two were sisters. They didn't last in the business long at all, and God bless them, for getting out of it, because the gals weren't making that much money back then at all.
I just want to quickly say before I lose this train that I think Moolah carried on what she experienced with Billy Wolf. And I know Terry and Dave know what I'm talking about, some of the abuse. And so in turn, when she took over booking the women, when Billy Wolf was out of the picture and he had abused both of his wives or ex-wives, June Byers and Mildred Burke, total legends. But Moolah carried on that kind of tradition, locking up the girls, taking their money, taking her cut, barely giving them anything. And one last thing, Sue Green said, which is no surprise, that most of the female workers in the 70s were gay, but could not come out. And she said, you'd be surprised at the percentage. And she's now happy she can come out fully. And others can too. And we're in a different era, period. So I'm sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
All good. And you're absolutely right about that as I get myself a little drink here. But Terry, because I don't know your story as well as I know Dave's, because, had Dave on before and we've talked off air and stuff and everything. But can you tell me this story of ring announcing in college and getting your foot in that way?
Yeah, I met the promoter in Cincinnati and Dayton, Les Ruffin, and became friendly with him, hung out in many a bar with him and the gang. And he knew I was in college in Cincinnati studying communication, and my dream was to be a wrestling announcer, and he helped me make it happen. Gave me my start in Dayton, and then Mike Lauren, Porky Pig, Sheik's bodyguard, was running a couple of towns. He saw me in Dayton and invited me to start regularly announcing in Sandusky and Mansfield, Ohio. And eventually the Sheik came around and he saw me and talked to me, and the rest was history.
Is that the same Porky Pig that had gone ahead and worked with Dr. Sam Shepard?
Yep.
From Fugitive fame?
Yep. Yeah, they put him in, I think, with Shepard because they knew Mike could pretty much pull a good match out of him.
Let me ask you, Terry, though, because you said bodyguard. Was he sort of like John Swensky's policeman to Roy Shire, meaning a hooker shooter? I've never heard that Lauren, obviously I knew he could wrestle, but was he fulfilling that same role when you say bodyguard?
Yeah. Yeah, he was. And in fact, in Japan, there's a tape of Mike as the Sheik's so-called manager, and he actually got into the ring and was arguing with the referee and such. But yeah, he was the bodyguard. And one time the Sheik told me he's not there so much to protect me from the fans, but other wrestlers. And think about it. There was a lot on the line there. And especially, I think in Japan, there might have been a few people who would have loved to have made their name by taking down the Sheik. And probably same thing in the U.S.
Wait,
well,
so
Mike Lauren was a former policeman, so he was a legit, tough man. And he also drove, the Sheik around and everything, and
Wow.
jobs, for years, and he was Mike Lauren, always an enhancement talent. Then he changed to Porky the Pig, and when he'd bring out a little piglet to the ring, and Kerry would have to take care of that piglet sometime.
And the pig crapped in the ring all the time.
Was it a big pig or a little baby pig, like you're saying?
Baby.
It sounds like a baby.
Yeah.
Wait, so what was Mike's shtick? I never got to see footage of him or anything, or in the flesh. Did he do anything? Because the Sheik's territory was so futuristic in terms of, if you see Vince in the 80s with characters, that was all Sheik, primarily 70s. But Mike Lauren wasn't. What was he doing to fulfill the Porky Pig, gimmick? Was there no Porky Pigging? No, that's all, folks. Nothing like that.
Well, he sort of looked like a pig.
That'd be great before he applied like a figure four or some finisher. Go, that's all, folks, and then he goes into the finisher on the guy if he's finally going to win a match.
He would do little things here and there, like I think he would get down on all fours and he would talk to the pig. The pig would converse. He and the pig would converse. But other than that, I guess that's enough.
And then what period of time, last cue, I'll shut up. When did Mike Lauren accompany Sheik? Are we talking 60s before Bob started All Japan in 72, 73?
70s.
Okay,
Well,
so 70s. I just don't recall Mike over there. Certainly, I don't recall Ernie Roth going to Japan with Sheik. He went with him to Honolulu for Ed Francis, and obviously many times for Cal Eaton and Mike LaBelle in L.A. But I don't think Ernie ever made it to Japan. So I've never heard that about Mike Lauren.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that tape for you.
Wow.
Well, it's funny, and I'm going to throw Dave under the bus here. And well, not so much under the bus, but if you heard the previous conversation, I had surprised him with my knowledge of the Scholar. But I'm curious to know, because I was watching stuff today and listening to, which, by the way, check out Big Time Memories, Rocks TV, YouTube, all that fun stuff. Get that in now. But there was a story Dave was telling, which I found pretty hilarious because of how the structure was back then, territories, all that stuff. But there, at the time, there was a newer territory. I don't know if you call it outlaw or whatever the case is, but there was a portion early on of this new show where somebody was trying to rip a phone book and cut a promo and stuff like that. What in the hell was going on? It was like 6 or 7 takes to do the interview. What was that, Dave?
That was Continental Wrestling.
Not Continental of down in South, right? The Fallers.
No. This was Continental Wrestling Association. It was a collaboration between Louis Martinez and Ron Martinelli. And it all came about because Ron Martinelli, wrestler, was going to go down to Florida. He was an enhancement talent here going nowhere, but he had a chance to go down to Florida for Eddie Graham. And like days before he was going down, he was coming out of a local cleaners with his clothes. And he was walking, to his car, and some woman put her car in reverse instead of forward, and it pinned Ron against the wall of this cleaners. Yeah. And being a bodybuilder that he was, he held the car back until she can get it back in gear. But he was still injured pretty well. But he ended up getting like $375,000 or some, big amount of money. And so, what do you do when you get that kind of a big payoff? Well, you start a wrestling promotion.
Oh no.
You know, that's the easiest way to lose it. So him and Louis Martinez, you know, concocted this, you know, small little promotion. It had myself, Blackjack Luca, Louis Martinez, Fred Curry, Bobby Fulton of all people, who made it as, you know, big as the Fantastics. So many other guys, and they ran only like 3-4 shows, you know, and that was it. You know, that was the promotion. But the funny thing about it, this was 1980, and it was just before Big Time Wrestling, the Sheik's promotion, was going under. And what we did is we had George Cannon do some promos for us. And we bought time on the Sheik's Big Time Wrestling show. And so all the commercials were either local TV commercials or our commercials, you know, promoting our shows. So that was a funny thing about that one.
Sheik must have been hot. Sheik had to be hot.
I'm sure he was, but, you know, what is he going to do? You know, but years later, just like in, you know, 1974, 75, when Terry and Killer Brooks, Tony Marino, they went rogue also and started the UWA, Universal Wrestling Association. And, you know, but over time, you know, Terry ended up going back working for the Sheik. I ended up going back and managing the Sheik. So he was a very forgiving guy. You know, like I say for many years, if you were in his family, so to speak, you know, you were, you know, well loved by him. And, you know, he always forgave and forget. But there was other times, other guys that, you know, he wasn't so generous with, let's put it that way.
I put this to both of you, but I'll start with Terry because, you know, wrestling is wrestling. Work or shoot, sir. Were you really knocked out by a can of beer?
Yeah, oh God, yeah. Well, no, it was a wine bottle.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it. You want me to tell the story?
Go for it.
Or should I keep it to myself? No. It was one
All right,
night.
folks, look it up now. Go ahead.
It was in Toledo, Ohio, and Ben Justice.
Home of the Mud Hens.
Yeah, home of the Mud Hens. 3-2, I think. And Ben Justice had just turned heel. And walking back to the dressing room, I was right behind him. And I saw some people up in the cheap seats getting ready to hurl something. And I think it occurred to me it was a bottle. And I walked up to him to say, watch out. And he, as he looked up, the bottle came flying and it hit me, knocked me cold. Dave was there. And I bled all over somebody's suitcase in the dressing room. And they took me to the hospital by ambulance. And I had 6 stitches. I will say this, though, that the really cool thing was seeing about 8 or 9 wrestlers waiting for me in the lobby.
Did you get $600,000 out of that too? Like,
yeah, I got a Purple Heart though.
He never cashed a check though.
We won't talk about the cashing of checks like that famous Montreal trip that we talked about the last time, but. Dave, since you were known as the Supermouth and could do some talking, did you have stuff thrown your way?
Oh, gee, are you kidding me? I've been spit at, piss thrown on me, coins thrown at me, stabbed once when I was down south working, punched, kicked, yeah, you name it, it happened. You know, it's part of the trade, I guess, as a manager. I don't think any manager, old school, would say that nothing ever happened to them.
Did Detroit have its own version of Hat Pin Mary? Because there were quite a few territories. We had I can't think of her full name, Nellie, who Dick Lane would always reference. That's where the Whoa Nellie came from, that Keith Jackson admits later taken from Dick Lane in L.A. But Capital Sports, Tri-WF and Senior had one of the more famous ones. There was a Mid-Atlantic one. So were there sort of insane, say, females that got a little too carried away, marks in either Michigan overall or Ohio, you guys recall?
Yeah, there were a lot of insane people, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, violent and insane.
No, not in Detroit, because the seats, front row seats, they were a little farther back. I'd say 6-8 feet from the ring, and they had tons of security. They had the Star Security. Shout out to good friends Dennis Wagner and Kenny and Gil and those guys. Plus the local police. There was a lot of them there. So, and they were stationed around the ring. 2 of them at almost both sides of the ring. So nobody. I'd say it never happened. There was a couple times fans got so upset that they tried to get in the ring, and they were really sorry that they tried. Toledo, no, in Toledo they had these little cement canisters in each corner they almost looked like they tied yarn around the ring. It wasn't rope, it was like yarn. It was so skinny. I remember Dayton, Ohio, the fans, when we had our UWA promotion doing down there, that was real dangerous because the fans were like 3 feet from the ring. So I'm standing outside, so I had people behind me like only a foot away. So that was pretty dangerous there.
And what about riots? Last question. I don't, I was at the Chicago Amphitheater, which is well known for lots of riots during the Bruiser Crusher 70s days. I can't seem to recall anybody talking about riots in your neck of the woods, whether it was Martinez and Johnny Powers' thing that they were doing, or Sheik's office, or non-Sheik offices in Michigan, Ohio.
I don't think there was any, I can't recall any riots besides the Cleveland one with, what was it, Ox Baker and Johnny Powers when they turned on Ernie Ladd. But Terry, can you think of any other really riots that we had around the territory?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me.
Oh, boy.
You remember you may not have been around then, Dave, when the Sheik wrestled Valentine. I think it was a cage match, and I think there may have been an attempt by Eddie Creechman to douse the cage with lighter fluid and light it on fire. And the people rioted. They had the riot squad come in, and there's an article. There was an article published in the Detroit Free Press the next day which detailed it. In Toledo, it used to happen quite frequently, and this will bring up a lot of stories. The Magnificent Zulu seemed to be in the middle of a couple of them because he was sort of a smartass, and
in wrestling, smartasses.
Yeah, but there were a couple there. I was in Cleveland one time, and I think it was the Sheik against Johnny Powers, and the chairs started coming down again from the cheap seats. You would think they would have bolted the chairs down, or maybe the people took care of that themselves. But yeah, the chairs were flying there too, but you never could tell.
And Terry, I've told this to Dave a million times. Zulu, after he and Bearcat Wright tried to sue Roy Shire when he got closed his office January of '82, tried to sue him for racism and yada yada. Well, Zulu then went on. Ron Pope, wasn't that his name?
Yeah.
Yes.
He went on to work as a bouncer at an infamous strip club by LAX for many, many years. I used to stay in contact with him because we talked about him coming into LA and not lasting very long, and then coming back with another gimmick, and that I don't think I ever heard of him working anywhere thereafter. But it turned out to be a nice guy after that. I think he was humbled by his experience in the biz not getting over, and really not.
He was a nice guy. I got along with him real well. he was the royal shits in the ring. That's just a doubt, no doubt. Everybody hated working with him because he didn't know his right from left, or nothing. But the most famous thing about Zulu here is like the day in Toledo, or was it Toledo or Canton, Ohio, Terry?
Canton.
Yeah, Canton, where he took a lead pipe to Cowboy Frankie Lane's head.
Here's a Frankie Lane until that trip to All Japan, where Baba had to get him the hell out of the country, and that was kind of the end of his career, which was very sad the way it ended. And he ended up having dementia for a year or two before he passed. You guys might know far better. Up in where was he? Where did he pass? I don't know if it was Ontario or Nova Scotia.
No,
Elviston, Ontario was his hometown.
Okay.
Yeah, but he was in a nursing home facility in Sarnia, Ontario. And myself and Shuhai, what was the kid's name?
Aoki?
Yeah. He, every time he'd come to the States, like at least around here, Toronto, because we'd always meet up in Toronto for the Titans in Toronto reunion. And there was one time that, I was up there and he said, hey, are you going back to Detroit? And I said, yeah. He says, well, I know where Frankie Lane is at. Would you want to, can I hitch a ride with you? I says, well, heck yeah. So we stopped in Sarnia, Ontario and saw Frankie. The only bad part is, Frankie, me and him were friends since I was a young kid. Really nice guy. He used me on some shows that he promoted in London, Ontario, but at the time that we went to see him, he was just so far out of it. He didn't know me or even that he was a wrestler at all. It really sad.
Dave, you should have seen him when LaBelle gave him a good push, October, November 71, put the strap on him. He held the record. He just drop kicked Black Gorman, pinned him in like 6 seconds. I don't know if you'd come into the office yet, but he really was good. And then they do the phantom title switch. They claim that Killer Kowalski and Eddie Graham's Florida territory, where actually Kowalski was. Walt was actually there for like 2.5 months. Frankie Lane obviously wasn't, but they claimed Frankie dropped the strap to him. And then they had the rematch right after our Battle Royal show, and Walt just, it was a total squash on Lane. He left the territory, and then I think you were there when he came back at our 73 Battle Royal as a heel with the mustache and beard, and he no longer really could go in the ring. It was just punch and kick like tri-WF crap. But this guy it was worlds different. He really was an amazing babyface, flying and multiple drop kicks, in succession, and paired with Raul Mata, and they were doing the earliest versions in the U.S. of the Motorola, or what became known as a Frankensteiner. We're talking 71.
Yeah, I always, at least on our Big Time Memory show, because the question Terry and I posed to each other was, what was the best match we've ever seen? And I said it was Frankie Lane versus Chris Colt. And wow. I think Chris Colt and Frankie Lane are probably the most underrated talents in the history of professional wrestling that don't get their due. And I think, Terry, what was your favorite match you said you saw?
Let's see, Zulu and no. One that really just totally enthralled me was Bobo Brazil against Johnny Valentine. It went an hour at Cobo Arena in Detroit, and we made a full hour TV show out of that one match. And just an incredible match with these two of the top guys of all time.
Is there footage of that? Did that end up in the Pedro Ronnie Martinez, whatever, the PM Film and Video collection?
I've never seen it. Probably recorded over.
There's not enough Johnny Valentine footage. Dave, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Bobo, there's another guy who doesn't, get all the credit that he deserves. Everybody says that Ron Simmons was the first, African-American champion. No way. It was Bobo. And the thing I loved about Bobo is that he was so talented in the ring, but on the other side of the coin, that guy could sell, for the other, his, whoever he was going against, especially the Sheik. Bobo could sell like nobody. I would say the top three, at least in our area, sellers who, worked at the best: Bobo, Louis Martinez, and Mark Lewin. Those three guys can make everybody, look like a world champion, no matter who they were going against. And man, could they sell. And all three of them were able to bring the crowd into the match, into the story that they were telling.
I think Bobo could fire up. He fired up in L.A. like against Ernie Ladd and Blassie, and obviously Sheik. He had many matches with the Sheik in L.A. certainly. So last question for a little while. What made, because I called it the longest feud, up until whatever, early 80s, the longest feud in wrestling. What made Bobo Sheik so magical all around the world?
They brought everything they brought excitement. They brought heat. They brought the fans into the match. They gave the fans their money's worth every time they went against each other. And they were marquee names. Bobo Brazil on his own, the Sheik on his own, marquee names. And you put those two together, it's like, two Super Bowls, all wrapped into one.
And it was the build also. The way they worked it often was the Sheik was afraid of Bobo and would run from him and refuse a match. That's when the Weasel, Ernie Roth, was at his best, trying to finagle or not putting the title on the line against Bobo or just avoiding him. So the people really wanted to see it, the number one face and the number one heel. And they always delivered.
Well, here's a piece of trivia for the fans listening. There was a Bobo Brazil fan club back in the 60s. And who was the president of that fan club? None other than Terry Sullivan. Yeah. And then also back in, I think it was like late 60s, early 70s, there was a Sheik fan club. And who was one of the presidents of that fan club?
Was it Dave?
No, you, wasn't it?
Yeah, I ran one, but I wasn't the only one. There was like at least 3 or 4 if you looked at the old. That was the first place we would go to because they were like our version of the sheets. Other than newsletters, was the newsstand magazines, the ones like Wrestling World that had fan club, 2 pages on fan club happenings. We all had it. That was the way we communicated, other than writing letters. Or I don't know if early on when you guys were still fans and not involved in the biz, taping onto cassette. We didn't have VCR, so we would tape the promos, the boys' promos, and trade it. I would get stuff from the AWA. John Arisi sent me King Curtis with those amazing promos from New York. George Beppu in Honolulu would send, so we were trading that stuff. But that was how we expressed ourselves, was fan club newsletter bulletins. I don't think, Dave, I was thinking you might have ran a fan club because you were with the WFAA. It was partly your creation with you guys all paired together on WFAA.
Before that, though, it was the Michigan scene.
Yeah, I ran the Michigan Scene fan club with Alan Cooper for a couple years, and then I got involved with the WFIA. I was on the board of directors, and if I can put this out there too, people go to Facebook or look up Wrestling Fans International Association on Facebook and YouTube or whatever. Put that in because it's been revived by a new board and a president, or I should say executive director, a gentleman by the name of Brad Drake. And they're trying to revive the organization that Don Wilson started back in 1967. And we, that was the place for wrestling fans back then, during the kayfabe era to get together. And we got together all across the country with, conventions and stuff. Nothing like, the fan fest and stuff of today, which are just money grabbing things for all the guys, to make money and, sell their $75 autograph or get their picture taken with it for $50. All the wrestlers that came to the WFIA conventions, didn't charge anything. They weren't paid anything. If anything, all they got was a free meal at the banquet. And it was like the WFIA really brought together the fans, the promoters, and the wrestlers themselves back in the day when it was not supposed to happen.
Was there more, Dave, with WFIA than just the earliest conventions? Because I didn't come aboard, I wasn't even part of the board until 74. But were there anything more than the annual conventions? Like there would be Detroit, obviously, St. Louis, LA, which I think was 71, et cetera, in the better years, the Don Wilson, Mike Ratchner years of it. But were there any other ancillary events, or was it just the one annual? I'm pretty sure it was just the one annual convention.
Yeah, it was just the one annual convention. But then again, there was one time we held a conference in Boston because the promoter at the time was Abe Ford.
Right.
And there was a conglomerate that ran the WWF at the time. Vince McMahon Sr. and there was the promoter
and Phil Zacco, who promoted.
Yeah, Zacco and Vanzetti and all the other crooks.
Willie Gilzenberg.
Yeah, Willie Gilzenberg. And they basically kicked out Abe Ford, and Ernie Roth, or Abdullah Farouk, or as he was known in the East Coast, the Grand Wizard, him and Bob Harmon became the promoters in Boston. And they invited us, to come there and host a conference. And then we ended up coming back like a few years later with an actual WFIA convention.
That was 75, where Rizzi and I won all the awards for the Blassie fan club. He started it. I was vice president. And at the same time, I ran the Tolos Brothers thing and won everything in 77 on my own. But Ernie was like the only talent sent by Vince Sr. to the Boston thing, whereas all the other ones, Atlanta, which I think was 74, all of the faces and heels were all there. And, it was neat to see you. Dallas, Fritz sent everybody. Fritz even brought in Moolah and Vicky Williams and Sandy Parker, all of his talent, his kids, they were all there at the 77 Dallas, which was a real good one. But the Atlanta one with Gordon Soley, I don't think you were at that because you were already in the biz by 74.
No, I was in Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Kansas City, wasn't that
76?
Yeah.
76, because that's when I won Manager of the Year. And you can go on YouTube. I have the presentations and everything from the Kansas City convention and the Atlanta convention. There's no audio to it because we didn't have videotape machines back then, and we didn't have a TV crew coming to our conventions either. So if you go on YouTube and type in WFIA or Wrestling Fans International Association, I did Detroit, Kansas City, and Atlanta. So you can watch that and see all the guys that showed up.
Was Detroit 67 or 68 or 69 as WFA?
No, WFIA was 73.
Really? Detroit?
Yeah, Detroit was, because Terry was there. The Detroit one was great, and I got to think, more than anybody, Terry was responsible for getting a lot of the guys there, because we had both baby faces and heels show up, basically for the first time. We had Dr. Jerry Graham, who was sitting next to Fred Curry. We had Bull Curry. The promoter, Francis Fleischer, Terry, myself, Guy Mitchell was there too, Les Ruffin, the Tunnies. We had a great turnout there, and it was a lot of fun.
I'm just doing something really quickly, Jonathan. I'm sorry I'm stepping on you, on the history of Tri-WF managers, but in particular with Ernie Roth. Ed Gurria, the wrestling phantom, he's a big time historian, and he said that Ernie came in. I didn't know this because I thought that once Bruno did not like Tony Angelos, the manager of the Mongols, and Crusher Oscar Verdú, who had come out of Detroit, forget what year, and had recommended Albano take over. And I thought, so they bumped and pushed Angelo out of the way, kind of clumsily, and then Albano is taking over for Tony, and then I thought Ernie Roth as Grand Wizard started, say 71 there for Tri-WF, or maybe 72, but no, Ed said that Ernie came in with the Sheik in 68 for a series with Bruno, and then he simply stayed on or did multiple tours. So do you recall, I thought Ernie was working exclusively for Detroit until leaving full time and then assuming the Grand Wizard thing, but I guess I'm totally wrong on that. Or do you recall, because I don't even recall them calling him Abdullah Farouk in the Tri-WF for Capital Sports for Vince Sr. Do you recall any?
No. Hey, Terry, let you tell the story of Ernie around here, because not only as a manager, tell the fans what else he did.
Oh my God, he was in the business for years and years and years. He had different incarnations: Jay Wellington, Radcliffe, Armstrong K. He played a very effeminate manager of Maurice and Barrand when they were red hot, but only in this area. He also promoted a lot of towns around the area, and he was a commentator. Back in the day, in the 60s, until the advent of videotape, most of the major cities, and not even so major, most of the cities had their own weekly television show. And Fred Curry was telling us, told Dave for Big Time Memories, I think it was, they did as many as 6 or 7 TV shows a week, in addition to the towns. And Ernie was the commentator for a lot of those. In fact, he was the commentator in Cleveland, but he also commentated for San Francisco prior to Roy Shire coming in, and he worked for Stu Hart up in Calgary.
And the San Francisco promoter, Joe Malkowitz, was the one that Roy Shire aggressively pushed out. He took a bunch of talent from Ohio and Indianapolis: Pepper Gomez, Bob Ellis, Kenji Shibuya,
Ray Stevens,
obviously Ray, who's his top lead heel. And then Sheik came in and was working for Roy, doing spots here and there his first 2 years, 61 and 62. But I didn't know that Ernie had done any commentary for Joe Malkowitz, the prior promoter to Shire in San Francisco.
And Ernie also was a weatherman down in Ohio, wasn't he, Terry?
I didn't know about that, but I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, I know he did other stuff, besides, the wrestling thing. I thought he was a weatherman there, and he was a DJ and somewhere.
Radio, I think
it been Grand Rapids or somewhere like that. But yeah, like you mentioned, he had a lot of different, manager personalities before he became
Mr. Clean. Where did he do Mr. Clean? Was that limited to Ohio, Detroit?
No, that was more Indianapolis and Chicago with the Bruiser.
Well, and Jonathan, we're talking about Ernie Roth, Abdul Farouk, the Weasel, Grand Wizard, so many others. An amazing person, an amazing talent. And you guys know better, but man, when he'd come into LA, we would just salivate because the guy was just so effing good.
Yeah,
exactly.
Magnet.
Tri-WF Grand Wizard stuff, whatever, but he did his best work, obviously. I mean, Toronto at Maple Leaf Gardens with Sheik. Obviously, these guys know him, their magnificent home base, the whole Michigan area. But man, when he'd come into LA and he was hung above the ring, the very last, third and last Blassie Sheik cage match in the little, they call it the Weasel cage. Dave probably remembers it from 1970 that finally turned Blassie face in the heel Blassie Sheik series. Final one, he's up there. He throws down what would eventually hit Blassie later on with John Tolis to set up the outdoor Coliseum thing, which Sheik and Bobo Brazil were second main event underneath Blassie Tolis, as Dave knows. Obviously, he shot it. But he throws down Monsoul's powder, boxer's powder, to stop cuts from that tiny little cage, but Blassie got it. nailed Sheik with it, and then turned full-fledged. And the following week, Dave probably remembers, Rocky Johnson was Blassie goes up to him, and Rocky Johnson doesn't trust him, and Blassie says, "Look, I want to wrestle clean, what we called scientific face-face match." And Johnson said, "Oh, I don't think I want to be involved in that, blah, blah, blah." Blassie said, "I'll retire if I throw even or do any underhanded dirty tactic," was his exact words. And they went, it wasn't a legit hour, but they went Broadway, and Blassie was made man. He was over, thanks to Rocky Johnson, but thanks to the Sheik and Ernie Roth prior to that.
Yeah, I mean, even though fans that are listening in here, they can't really see what I'm going to talk about for a small second, but you mentioned the Coliseum show in LA where he went against Bobo, but over my left shoulder here is the robe and headpiece that he wore that Sheik gave me after that match. Wow. It's like, one of his most famous robes that he wore in the early 60s and throughout. And it's on, so many magazine covers and stuff that I shot and other photographers. And it's like one of my prized possessions.
Well, is that the Burnous? What's the top part of that? I'm looking at it. It's a circular thing. Was that part of the Burnous?
Yeah.
Wow.
That was one of his earliest ones. He told me when he was Sheik of Araby, because he wore, so many different outfits then. I mean, back in the early 50s, he had a big camel in the very front of his trunks, as opposed to in the 60s and 70s, he had a small camel on the side of his trunks. And that was another piece that he gave me. And I have so many other things of his. And I think I might have mentioned to Jonathan, last time I was on that he'd always have his tape pencils, start a match. And that's, one thing, to get the blood flowing. And there was so many times that, when I was managing him that, he would use it, and then all, the baby face would take over, the Sheik would fly the pencil in the air, the baby face would find it, start stabbing the Sheik, the crowd would go nuts, and the referee would, make them, drop it or whatever. And it's like, I didn't want fans, to get it. So I would always, try to grab it if I could, or if the referee put it in his pocket, and I would, put them in my outfit and, carry on. And then, I'd get home and later and, be washing or, doing laundry or something. Oh, here's one of the tape pencils with blood all over it. And it's like, I'd save them. So I've got 6 or 7 of them in my collection that, if ever, cloning came about and, I could bring the Sheik back to life.
If you ever wish to depart with any of that, let me know.
But do you have a pencil, one of them handy? And did they have a small blade so the guy could gig, or was the guy gigging on his own and the pencil really didn't contribute to the bleeding?
Well, here's an unknown fact that people don't get a lot of times. When, Sheik would use the pencil, and he was gouging it into somebody's forehead, and it looked like the pencil, he's doing it with such force that it was bending. But sometimes he would break the pencil, and then tape it so that when, he's gouging it into somebody's forehead, it looks like he's gouging so hard that it's bending the pencil. So, a few of them that I have with blood all over it, I can, put it up against a table or something and it would bend. So that was one of his little secret magic tricks.
Because Abby said he could just slap his forehead like this and boom, instant blood. There was nothing needed because, the tissue never really ever healed.
Well, yeah, that's that's what happened all the time, especially when Bob Ellis came back into the territory and Johnny Valentine was here. They would match up the two cowboys because, Valentine back in the 50s was known as Cowboy Rocky Valentine.
Jules Strombo gave him that name, and he said, I told him many times, he said he hated it, hated working in LA 50s as Cowboy Rocky Valentine. And when he came back before Mike LaBelle screwed him on being the booker in 73, that how Gene LaBelle introduced him, and he goes, "No, I'm Johnny Valentine. This was at KCOP."
Yeah, and when they started a feud between the two cowboys, Cowboy Bob Ellis and Cowboy, or I shouldn't say Cowboy again, but Johnny Valentine. But Johnny Valentine, his matches started so slow, just because he would try to get fans into the match. I mean, his style may not ever work today because fans would get bored, but I remember him just putting a headlock and working a headlock on Bob Ellis. And Bob Ellis, his scar tissue was so bad that he would start bleeding, without even having the gig. Which, a lot of times, Sheik was that way. King Curtis, look at that melon, the carved up melon he had. Abby, the same way.
Worst forehead I'd ever seen. I've seen them all, including Brody's, was El Signo in Mexico, who came over a lot when Shinma Jr. for the Universal late 80s, early 90s Japanese group. He'd bring over the top echelon, all of the top. Perro Aguayo Sr. had an awful forehead, but El Signo had horizontal and vertical. It was like checkerboard squares just a million horizontal vertical lines, just carefully carved, almost to 180 degrees from mid skull around to the sides.
But did he wear a mask?
No. He did initially, and they dropped, he lost the mask like they all did. But his forehead, and I will dig out some photos and show you personally, and I want to bring them on air, the worst forehead. I'd seen every one of them, from Sheik on down to King Curtis, etc.
Wow.
If I may, well, first off, I want to also give Terry his flowers, because he is a man of my own heart. Before I ask my next couple of questions, because there's some stories I definitely want to get in on this episode that I didn't with Dave the last time, but I want to get in with Terry as well. But first and foremost, let me give him his flowers and why he's a man of my own heart. And that is because he, being Terry, worked at a shoot job at FM 104 in Toledo, and it was also at the time a little bit a program director, and most of the time at that station it was a rock station, and we were talking radio as everybody was coming into the room. Terry also taught radio at the University of Toledo, taught 24 years, worked for the university for 33 years in total. So as a shoot gig, I wanted to put that in there as well. So that is much love and appreciate it, because that was part of my background besides history, radio and all that stuff. So I appreciate you that on that side of things. But the things I want to get in, first and foremost, Terry is from Toledo, Ohio. And there was another famous person from the professional wrestling world that's been mentioned during this Calling It in the Ring, and that'd be Dr. Jerry Graham. So for both of you, and Dave is laughing as I say that, and I don't know what his doctrine was in, but I know you guys got to have Dr. Jerry Graham stories. So if you may.
Go ahead, Terry.
Jerry Graham Jr. is from Toledo, not the old man.
Okay.
No relation.
Thank you for correcting me.
To Jerry Graham. Is that correct? Jerry
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Jerry Graham. What a trip. I'm a tree surgeon. Want me to take off a limb?
Now, as the doctor of things, Dr. Jerry Graham actually he had a doctorate. And in the early to mid 50s, he would always do a sideshow in the ring of hypnotism. A lot of people
beat me
don't
to the
know
punch
that.
here.
Well,
I've never seen it. He never ever hypnotized me. If ever he hypnotized somebody, it was Dr. Beach the night he cut him up in Cobo Arena. And I mean, Dr. Beach got like 60, 80 stitches, Terry?
ear to ear.
From a fan or from a match with Jerry?
Oh, from Jerry.
Yeah.
What did he gig him with? A saw?
It looked like it.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I've got photos and stories, but really quickly, then go back to Jerry Graham at the whatever year it was, 96 Cauliflower Alley with Ray Stevens behind him. Jerry Graham was heckling our then CAC president, Cauliflower Alley Club in LA, Lou Thez. He kept screaming stuff at Lou. They had major heat because Lou was always retelling that story of when Jerry Graham's mom died and putting him in the convertible and all of that, driving around with her in the back dead. But Jerry was a swell guy, and at his end, Kurt Brown and I and some others would bring him food. He had like an 8 by 12 or 18-foot apartment. It was the drizzling shits. He was working for a really awful East LA little indie out in the park. He'd be in his wheelchair and manage a gig in front of like 38, 60 people tops, but was at his best. And I asked Tom Burke. I posed Tom with Jerry Graham and Napolitano. That was the last public appearance any of us saw him, and he went out doing what he loved, and that was getting under Lou Thesz's skin. With Ray Stevens and John Tolis like kind of egging him on because they'd all had quite a few drinks in them.
Hold on, wrestlers with drinks in them? What a shock.
Wait, at the bar, Dave knows. How many times, Dave, have I bored you with this one? Victor Rivera, Steve Strong, who Stu Hart trained, Mondo Guerrero, and Victor Rivera. Last time we saw Victor Rivera before allegedly his wife murdered him when he got out of jail for something he didn't commit. But those 4 guys were in the back while this is going on with Jerry Graham in the front by the bar, and they're yelling and screaming at the stage, and Lou Thez could not get order, and he said, this is the last time we ever have a bar at CAC. So pissed at Mondo, Victor Rivera, Steve Strong, Don Morocco was part of that. They were like falling on the floor. They were so drunk. It was like the Roppongi district of Japan where all these Japanese businessmen are laying effing drunk, unconscious on the streets for several hours. That was how it was at that CAC.
It's almost as bad as the Ray Stevens stories I would hear with his wife who was a worker. And,
Teresa Thies.
Where she would have him on his knees, but that's a whole nother story.
Wait, him and Nick Bockwinkel and I forget one other guy were riding mopeds in Honolulu, and they were working for Ed Francis, totally butt naked, going up to the crater. Dave knows where it is. Terry knows. No, that was Maui, Mount Haleakala. They were in Maui. They'd gone over there, but it was like 6 a.m. and they, almost got arrested. I forget what the story was, but they were completely loaded.
Yeah.
Well, along those lines, I've got a story. And Dave's got a lot of stories.
I got to tell it.
Oh, Dr. Jerry Graham. I mean, we always say you don't have a Dr. Jerry Graham story. You weren't in the wrestling business. Me and Terry, did a few things on him on our Big Time Memory show. Go to there. We don't need to tell the stories because they're definitely extensive. Guys didn't want Dr. Jerry Graham riding with them in his cars because after the matches he would imbibe, with some booze, and if he had to go to the bathroom, well, he didn't ask to stop; he just went in the car. And
that's almost as bad as the. I'm sorry, Dave. That's almost as bad as the story I heard about the Great Harley Race, renting a U-Haul truck and throwing them in the back.
Can I tell one quick story? And we got to tell a couple of stories.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
This is one that I didn't see personally, but it was sort of infamous around the territory, and it was in the probably late 60s, and Dr. Jerry Graham was living in Williamston, Michigan, which is where the Sheik and his family, and he had a large family. Well, Joyce's family was a large family. And so it was Christmas Eve. It was snowing like crazy. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the one major intersection in Williamston, Jerry Graham stood in the snow in his underwear, directing traffic. And the Sheik got a call from one of the cops and had to go down on Christmas Eve night and corral Jerry Graham. And that, for a number of years, was the last time a wrestler was ever allowed to live in Williamston.
Yeah, there's one story that after Kobo shows, just over the years, we did so many things. We'd go to Greek Town, and we'd go, Frank and Danny Kanarick's house. And there was one time we went there, and a whole bunch of fans, I'd say like 10 of us, just the hardcore fans. We'd go there after the show, and there's times that we'd have like Eric the Red or Kabuki or, whoever wanted to come along and party with us and stuff. But there was one time somebody brought Dr. Jerry Graham, and it was like, I'd say March, and it was one of those.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this, but
cold
go ahead.
March days and stuff. And it was at a time when streaking was popular. So we're in, their apartment, and we're having fun and stuff. And all of a sudden, Jerry Graham stands up and he just peels off his clothes buck naked, and he goes outside. And it's like probably 45, 50 degrees tops. And he runs out. We're watching him. He runs out to the pool, which the pool wasn't even open yet. And he goes to the pool and he jumps in the pool. And it's like, gee, you talk about major shrinkage to start with. But then what happened was he swims around for a second. It's cold. He gets out real quick and he comes back to the apartment. And he was like, I don't know what kind of creature from horror movies, would compare, but Jerry Graham had moss and twigs and crap all over him as he walked back in, and he went into the shower and just showered off and just came back out, naked as hell, plopped back down on the couch, had some more drinks. And it's like, we're like, okay, well, this is what it's like, to be, around wrestlers back in, the glory days.
Oh, boy.
Terry hasn't heard this. Terry, I want to say this really quick about Jerry Graham. 1975, Vince wants to do a senior little tournament that never came about. He pulled the plug on it. It was going to involve Argentina Rocca, Rogers, and Jerry Graham. So Jerry Graham, he sends him to L.A. to work for us. I don't know how this all came about, but he has Ernie Roth manage him as Abdullah Farouk in 75 Los Angeles. And Ernie is supervising his diet, and Jerry is talking on TV. It wasn't this diet, obviously, but he was claiming to the marks on TV it was nothing but rice. He was on a rice diet. And he was there, and Ernie was always with him on TV. So I guess Ernie was staying in our territory because it was Wednesday, Saturday TV. And then I happen to be with Arisi. We go to Vince Sr.'s TV, where he has 3 tapings in one day, and it's Jerry Graham in 3 squashes with the Grand Wizard now, not Abdullah Farouk managing him. And Vince Sr. just wasn't impressed, but Jerry had lost a shitload of weight, at least like 90 pounds. And I can show you the photos. You wouldn't believe how skinny he was. And Jerry was so upset that Vince decided not to do this tournament with the legends that he was going to be part of. And he started drinking and he put the weight on, back. It was really tragic for those of us who love Jerry Graham. But let me shut up.
Okay. Next thing I want to bring up that I definitely got to get the story of. And I think this belongs to Dave's department. And I had this in the notes I sent you earlier. First off, I'm not surprised because everybody steals everybody's gimmick in terms of the wrestling business. There's not much fresh material. But apparently, you were known as Superstar Dave Drason because of something you saw in the magazines due to Billy Graham, but led to becoming Supermouth. But also, if you can tell the story at the same, I don't know where it is on the time frame of your career. You got to play with Ernie Ladd in Charlotte at a barbecue, basketball. So, could you tell those stories?
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah, you're right. After when I first started my career, I was superstar Dave Drason, and I really stole that from superstar Billy Graham. Never saw him, never met him, but I saw him in the magazines, and he was like red hot in New York at the time, and he was like, the coolest hippie dude wearing the, psychedelic and tie-dyed stuff, and I just loved it. So, I just stole, sort of the name at the time. And when I was working for George Cannon's Superstars of Wrestling, I was known as Superstar Dave Drason. And then I had a Superstar shirt one day, and I have a photograph of that in the ring. And it was like probably my second or third TV taping that, when I would do my promos, I would rant and rave, but, just like everybody, what you're supposed to do. And George Cannon's sidekick, Milt Bruskin, they were talking one day, or commenting, while I was out there, and they go, "This guy's not a superstar. He's a supermouth." And so Milt Bruskin, was the first guy that, that's how they changed my name. And, they would introduce me in the very next TV taping, that's what happened. They said, Supermouth Dave Drason. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll I'll go along with it and play along. And I'd rant and rave and, harass them, what you're supposed to do for calling me a different name than what I wanted. But now you mentioned the thing about playing basketball with Ernie Ladd. I was living with Sonny King. I was living with Sonny King in Charlotte, North Carolina, because Sonny brought me down there and was trying to get me a managing gig with the Crockett's. And I think George, I'm blanking out. George something was the booker at the
South.
Who?
George Scott?
Sandy Scott, or George Scott. George Scott.
Yeah. He was booking at the time, and they didn't use any managers in 1975 at all. And, I stayed down there with Sonny for a while, and, we tried a few things, and the, what's the rival group that Eddie Einhorn started?
IWA.
Yeah, they wanted me to come in there, and it's like I was a little disillusioned, and I was coming home, and but before that, I was with Sonny King, and the IWA was there, and Ernie Ladd and Bruce Swayze were in the IWA at the time, and they came over to Sonny King's house, and we were going to barbecue and have a good time. During the afternoon, we went out and saw the movie Walking Tall. So the four of us in the theater, and some wrestling fans noticed us, and, being all of us, Sonny King, all of us heels, we just, shut them down and, shut the hell up and, get away from us. So we watched Walking Tall, came back to Sonny's house, and we started barbecuing. So in the meantime, here's a basket. Well, first there was a soccer ball. Oh, that's right, because Eric the Red was with us. And there was a soccer ball. And Eric the Red grabbed the soccer ball, and we're like, what's this, overgrown buffoon gonna do with a soccer ball? This guy had that thing balancing on a toe, shipping it over to another toe, onto his head, on his elbow. We're like, holy bejesus. Well, come to find out, he's from, the old country in Europe, that he grew up playing soccer. So it's like, we were just amazed that, what Eric the Red could do with a soccer ball. So then we got done with that, and all of a sudden there's a basketball there. And we had like 20 minutes, or so before, food was ready. And it's like, I played basketball in college my first year. And, Ernie Ladd says, hey, you want to go shoot some hoops? So there was like a basketball court, half a block down. So it's like, yeah, I'll show Ernie Ladd a thing or two about how to play basketball, because I was playing in college at the time.
And most people think of him for football, correct?
Yes, exactly, because he went to college and played pro football. So anyway, we get to this basketball court, and I'm shooting a couple layups and stuff, and all of a sudden Ernie Land's standing at the foul line. He says, yeah, feed me the ball. So I, fed him the ball, and it's like 1, shoot, swish, 1, 2, swish, swish, swish. He hit like 8 to 10 in a row, and I'm like, holy crap, is this guy lucky or what? And then all of a sudden we said we're going to play a game of horse instead of, hey, I couldn't beat, him because he was like 6, 8 inches taller than me at the time. So we were going to play a game of horse. Oh man, he beat me without, it was so fast. And it's like, and then Ernie goes, man, you're pretty good. But I go, God dang, Ernie, how did you learn how to play basketball? He says, I initially went to college on a basketball scholarship before I went and played football. And it's like, well, I guess that's, I came crawling back, to our barbecue with my tail between my legs. He was great. Great athlete, great guy, fun to be with, amazing wrestling talent. I love Ernie Ladd, love Eric the Red, I love Bruce Swayze and Sonny King.
Well, there's 2 things I want to wrap with, or at least for me. And I'd like to hear Terry's perspective on this, because I kind of heard this from Dave on Big Time Wrestling and such. And feel free to chime in, Dave. But the first being, there was a big gap, like 30 or 40 years, that you guys had seen each other and reconnected at a convention, and then led to where we're at with Big Time Wrestling on YouTube and all that fun stuff. But the other thing is, and if both of you can contribute to this, you mentioned, I'm going to do a callback from earlier in this, and you guys were talking about good matches versus bad and all that fun stuff. I recently was watching this year's Mania with some fans, and I had mentioned about the SmackDown title match, Charlotte and Rhea Ripley, feeling like an instant classic. But wrestling in general, and I think, we can even include Mike on this too, because wrestling is so subjective in terms of what's good versus what's bad, match-wise and psychology and all that, because it's not like, say, baseball or football or basketball or whatever the case is, where there's statistics we can point to. So I know that's a lot there. So first, Terry, could you tell us about the reconnection with Dave, but also what about how do we, because I can think something's good compared to Dave can think something's good, Terry and Mike and etc. We all have different opinions what's good versus bad, no matter what match we look at throughout time.
Well, Dave and I had always been in touch, not regularly necessarily, but Malcolm Monroe, DBA, local or Detroit area independent wrestler, quite a successful one, has his own promotion called XICW, Extreme Intense Championship Wrestling. He's African American, and he brought wrestling back to Cobo Arena after 30 some years, like you said. And he invited a bunch of people who were there back in the day. Unfortunately, not that many remain, but I was one of the ones that he asked, and Dave helped him out getting in touch with a lot of the stars as well. But I walked into Cobo Arena and there weren't very many people around at that point. It was early. And I see Dave, and he's talking to Jim Cornette. And I walk up.
Damn.
I walked up and said, Dave. And he says, yeah, like, Dave, how you doing? He says, oh, I'm doing fine. How are you? And went back to talking to Jim Cornette, like, who's this jabroni interrupting us, And I said, Dave, you don't recognize me. And he said, I don't think so. Who are you? And I said, I'm Terry. And he said, oh my God. It was funny. I'll never let him forget it.
Yeah, that one of the most embarrassing experiences in my life.
Did that have anything to do with the wine you drink?
But both of us don't look like we did back, 30 some years that I haven't seen Terry. Both of us when we first started in the business and stuff, we both had straight hair. And then I got a permanent curly hair. Terry did the same thing, and now we're both seeing the results of us getting those perms back 30 some years ago. But let me say this about Terry, a great friend for all these years, and it doesn't really get the credit that he deserves. I mean, there's the greats, there's the Dick Lane, there's the Gordon Solis, there's the Lord Laytons. But Terry Sullivan ranks, in my mind, right up there with all those greats. He not only did big time wrestling, but he also did Bruiser Bedlam, after, big time wrestling folded. Always, because he was a fan, he knows the guys, he knows wrestling, and he comes across when he does his announcing in that way, as opposed to guys who are just there, as a sports entertainment announcer guy, doesn't know the business, doesn't know the holds, doesn't know the guys. Hey, I'm just saying, Terry Sullivan, Hall of Famer in my mind.
Well, thank you.
Well, he
David.
is the
we're all out of
IWB
time, or I would
Hall
do
of
the
Famer.
same for you. No, just kidding. Jonathan, you had a second part of that question. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. Well, first, I do want to give him flowers again, Terry. He is an IBW Hall of Famer. But my question was, for the second part of that, was, like I said, in quote unquote legitimate sports, and I say that tongue in cheek. And then when I say that, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, etc., those soccer, for our European listeners, there are statistics where you score goals, you score this, you did that, whatever. Yeah, you have statistics with those games. Wrestling, you don't have that. It's more subjective, I would say, where to say with current times, you have amateur wrestlers such as a Kurt Angle or to go back even further, Luthez and things like that. But then you have the entertainers in the ring. And, I mean, like there's different aspects to the wrestling business. So there's no one way to say, well, this guy was a 300 hitter. This guy did this. This guy, you know what I'm saying? In wrestling, there's not one way to say who was good, who was bad. Oh, Dr. Sam Shepard was the shits in the ring. But we look at Luthez or Kurt Angle or an Eddie Guerrero, Benoit, whoever, the technical side versus an Enzo Amore, who was good on the stick, but the shits as a wrestler. You know what I'm saying? That's where I was going with that.
Well, I think there is a measuring stick, and it, maybe not these days, but back in my time and Dave's time, there was the territory system. And, the guys that we had in Detroit, from like the top half of the card, had all achieved great levels of success in other territories, often main eventers or close to main eventers. So I would argue that was the measuring stick, how successful you were able to be, how many main events you did, and which translates into the amount of money that you made, which corresponds with the amount of influence that you might have in the business. But yeah, I think that it's the guys who achieved the success measured by their position in the card over however many territories they were in, over however many years they were able to maintain that level of success.
Before Dave and Mike throw in here, I do want to, and this is an outsider looking in here and not being in the business per se. But with that being said, how much of that could have been as far as earning your status be with the political side of the game of, being friendly with the promoters or any of that stuff from the territory days? But go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, Terry hit it right on the head. It all comes down to money. Doesn't matter who you are, how much talent you got, and or anything. Look at Hulk Hogan. Not much talent, and in my mind, but he.
But how many seats did he sell?
Right.
Yeah, it all comes down to money, and that's what every promoter looks at. I mean, like I said before, you got the guys like Frankie Lane and Chris Colt, had the most talent, in the world at the time. But if they weren't getting a push, first and foremost, and they weren't, put in the position, in the main events, those guys could have drawn money, but they didn't. The guys that drew money back in the territory days were the characters. The Japs, or what they call them, the Japanese, the hated Germans, you had, the Australians, the Indians, the Cowboys, whatever your gimmick was. And if you could draw it and draw fans to the arena, those are the guys who made money. Those are the guys that the promoters put over, plain and simple.
That's how you create stats. Was politicking as much a thing then? Because Frankie Lane and Chris Colt, for example, had they had the balls, or not so much the balls, but could speak up for themselves and politic to the promoter, the booker, etc. Was that as much of a thing? It's certainly a big thing now in terms of getting a push and getting opportunities to then draw, if you have ability on the stick and in ring.
Well, back in those days, you didn't have, you couldn't speak up. If you did, you were gone. Nowadays, all these guys have contracts. Back in, pre-1980s, no wrestlers had contracts. So, now, I mean, you got a contract, and if you piss off a promoter, say you got a 1-year contract, you piss them off in the first month, well, they got to pay you for 11 more months, no matter what you do. Back then, you speak up, the promoter's going to say, oh, he's a troublemaker. Like Thunderbolt Patterson, he spoke up a number of times, and he was kicked out of how many territories, for, speaking up for himself, being a black wrestler, really, not getting paid what he should.
But that goes down a whole different road that we can spend an hour and a half on.
Yeah.
But now it's a lot of who has ears. Plus, there's agents. There's the Barry Blausteins, the super agents of wrestling, and that might be one of Dave's famous wines at his world famous winery there. And do you own just one store, or are there a multitude of stores?
The one that I help out at?
Yeah.
No, just one.
Okay. Well,
for years after I retired from AT&T, I took over the largest wine shop in Michigan, Champagne's Wine Cellars, for years. And then I got disillusioned when, things happened there that I didn't feel were right. And I had a $6 million business that within a year and a half, they went out of business because my loyal customers, went with me. And I helped out at, a few other, wine shops, over the years. Now I help out at what's called Old Woodward Cellars in Birmingham, Michigan. We got a great high-end clientele. And, we have, probably the finest wine shop in the state of Michigan right now. We have Total Wine here also, which is like the big conglomerate around, the United States. I mean, they're the biggest selling because, they have a lot of cheap stuff and all, but, ours, small store, we carry quality. We have the knowledge, we know what we're talking about, and that's why people gravitate to our store.
Is that the thing you were talking about with the food and beverage when we got started?
Last night we did a wine and steak tasting. We have a new thing at our store called Fairway Meats, which is like the highest quality steaks in the city. This isn't like, your local, T-bone steaks and stuff like that you can get at a grocery store. These are very high-end marbled steaks that, they're not cheap. I'd say $55 to $105 for great food. A lot of people ain't going to spend that kind of money on it. But, when you taste quality like that, and taste quality in wine, and no matter what beverage you like, I always say everything in life is so subjective. Like food, wine, women, everybody has their own opinion. I'll say this. Whenever I see a picture of Charlotte Flair, and people are raving, she's the most beautiful woman on the planet. I mean, I look at her and go, my God, she's scary looking. I don't find her attractive at all. Same thing with Trish Stratus. I don't know, it might be the boobage that people, or guys, rave about. But everything is subjective in this world. And more so today because everybody is so sensitive. Ethnicity, you can't say anything about, I can't call them the Japanese Japs anymore. You can't say anything about, the Jewish community. You can't say anything about like the Lebanese community, which Detroit has the largest Lebanese community outside of Lebanon or the Middle East. We have the largest. And, we get along here. There's good and bad, of course. But, hey, I love the food.
That's life.
Jonathan, I think throw subjectivity out of it. I think the three of us, or at least I've always said, and I know Dave has, Sheik, greatest heel of all time, period.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, there's no question. Anybody that lived through that saw the spectacle, saw Japanese people part like the seas when he'd come out of Karakuan or any of the venues there, Kyoto, etc. They would just part the sea. They were so afraid of him, genuinely afraid. Never seen anything like it. We never will again.
Yeah,
and I would say that. Oh, go ahead.
Wait till you see the comments for the fans watching this show today. They're going to, Mike Lano, you're an idiot. It's Roman Reigns. It's Brock Lesnar. It's like,
you want Aura, Aura. That is the thing the guys in our day had. Not that they're not guys today that have it, the star quality, but Sheik, Blassie, Bruno, Dick the Bruiser had terrific, that thing they exuded. And I don't see that in spades the way we had it back then. Kowalski, all of these amazing talents.
Well, it's like younger fans of any sport, they haven't seen them, so they don't know. It's the same thing like modern day hockey fans. First of all, Gordie Howe, he's not spoken as one of the greatest anymore because the young fans haven't seen him. Wayne Gretzky, still sort of in our time, but he's been out of the, hockey for 20 years or so, and they're forgetting about him and they're touting all these younger hockey players as the Connor McDavid. They're saying he's the greatest of all time. Same thing in football. We
didn't ask Terry. Terry, do you agree? I think internationally, globally, the Sheik, there's nobody that could touch him as top heel in the business.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How many if I can interject here,
cities in a year.
And I would interject that the Sabu, his nephew, legit nephew, had carry on that, in his career.
He's great, but there was nobody like the Sheik, and I think Terry Sabu would tell you the same thing. There was nobody like him who lived that gimmick, and fans were genuinely afraid of him to the nth degree. I mean, everywhere. Dallas, Houston, Florida. I mean, places you don't normally think of the Sheik appearing. Memphis. Terry Sabu, great, but just different and not. I mean,
Sheik back to the subjective.
Sheik was on a whole other level.
and any young fans listening to this show, I mean, you may not have ever seen the Sheik, maybe heard of the Sheik, or say the worst thing in professional wrestling history, calling him the Iron Sheik. Forget that.
Baba, thank you, Baba.
Yeah, if you want to learn about the regular, the original Sheik, get Brian Solomon's book.
Right,
yeah, it's like
I got it in hand.
Book. Yeah, Blood and Fire, the wild tales about the original Sheik, greatest wrestling book ever written, ever researched. This tells every detail about this guy's life, pre-wrestling, wrestling, after wrestling. Great to me, greatest wrestling book ever written. Get it.
And I'll add
Amazon.
this to it,
I don't
Dave.
care how you get it. Get it. Read it.
Dave, I will add this to it with that book. The hell of a job Brian Sullivan did with it.
He researched that.
Without not being able to talk to the Sheik, because obviously he had passed away, but to have as much detail as he does in that book without talking to the Sheik is unbelievable.
Or the family. None of the family participated. This was all his research, and only talking to guys like myself and Kevin Sullivan and whoever else was around the Sheik. That's what the book is all about. You'll learn about the legend. It's right there.
I wanted to say this about the Sheik. Nice, wonderful human being. I mean, we all loved him. Any of us that got a chance to manage him or work around him absolutely loved him, worshiped the ground he walked on. And I hate to go, you guys, but at least
thank you, sir.
I'll let Dave be the real motor mouth, not me.
Yes. Well, I'm curious to know the rep because we were hinting at it there, and appreciate the time, gentlemen. But Terry, I know I was kind of tongue in cheek about with whiskey, and Dave was talking about his wine and his expertise and all that. To wrap, because we're relaxed here. If you were to have a drink of choice, what is your drink of choice when you are relaxing?
Miller Lite.
Okay. Fair enough. But on that note, gentlemen.
I'm a man of simple taste.
All right. I totally appreciate it. Same way with me. Make sure you check out the podcast or whatever you want to call it. It's Big Time Memories. It's Rocks TV, YouTube, all that fun stuff. We'll have links to that. Gentlemen, Dave, Drason, Burzynski, Terry Sullivan, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having us. Much appreciated, Jonathan.
My pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
This is Supermouth Dave Drason. I'm listening to Crazy Train, the best in the world right now. Please. And if you're lucky, Supermouth will be back.